There's a trail in the Pacific Northwest where 17 people have vanished without a trace since 1981, not across a 100-mile wilderness. One trail, 4.2 miles long, cutting through a valley that gets cell service and sits 12 minutes from a ranger station. Search teams deployed within hours in every case. Helicopters, cadaver dogs, infrared scans covering a 6-mile radius. They found camp stoves still burning, backpacks zipped shut with wallets and phones inside, water bottles placed upright on rocks. But never a body, never a struggle. The disappearances cluster in ways that make no statistical sense. All 17 happened between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. 11 occurred on days with zero cloud cover and temperatures between 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 74 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 happened within 200 yards of the same switchback. For 43 years, the National Park Service classified these as isolated hiking accidents, tragic but explainable. Dehydration, falls, animal attacks in remote terrain. That story held until 2019, when a retired ranger violated his NDA and released documents the agency had been sitting on since 1981, because the very first disappearance had a detail that should have stopped hikers from ever setting foot there again. Martin Kress was 52, an experienced solo hiker who'd logged over 400 miles in that region alone. October 14, 1981, he signed the trailhead register at 1:47 p.m. under clear skies. His Ford Bronco was still in the lot when rangers arrived at 7:30 p.m., keys locked inside, no signs of forced entry. What made them launch a search immediately was the dog. Martin's 4-year-old German Shepherd, trained for backcountry hiking, was found 3 miles east of the trailhead at 6:15 p.m., wandering along a service road. No injuries, no signs of distress. But when a ranger tried to walk him back toward the trail entrance, the dog planted his legs and refused to move. By dawn, they had 23 volunteers combing a grid pattern. The weather stayed perfect. Visibility stretched for miles. Martin had no known medical conditions, carried a first aid kit, and had filed a route plan that put him back at his car by 5 p.m. 12 hours into the search, a volunteer shouted from a clearing 200 yards past mile marker 2. But what the search team found 20 yards off the path made them question whether Martin had ever been alone out there. Martin's day pack sat upright on a flat granite slab, positioned in the exact center. Around it, in a perfect circle with a 3-foot radius, his belongings were arranged with geometric precision. Water bottle at 12 o'clock, compass at 3 o'clock, folded map at 6 o'clock, 2 granola bars at 9 o'clock. His sunglasses rested on top of the pack, lenses facing east. The slab itself was surrounded by soft dirt, still damp from rain 2 days earlier. Crime scene photos show boot prints from the search team approaching from the trail, but in a 10-foot perimeter around the rock, the soil was completely undisturbed. No prints leading in, no prints leading out, no drag marks, no signs anyone had knelt or crouched to arrange the items. The pack's contents were still inside, untouched. Wallet with $140 cash, car keys, a Pentax camera with 18 exposures remaining. Rangers processed the scene for 6 hours, bagged everything as evidence, and expanded the search to a 4-mile radius. They never found Martin Kress. His case file got 37 pages, hundreds of volunteer hours, and 0 leads. The lead ranger wrote one sentence in his report that the Park Service buried for 18 years. The sentence read, "Personal effects arranged in surveyor's cairn pattern. Reference map sheet 1897-04-B. Notation system discontinued." Park Service archivists found map sheet 1897-04-B in a mildew-damaged filing cabinet in 2001. It documented a trail marking system used by the Oregon Geological Survey for exactly 11 months before they abandoned it. The survey crew's foreman wrote that hikers kept complaining the markers pointed in wrong directions. 3 separate groups reported compass needles spinning near the cairns. 2 hikers described seeing the trail fork where no fork existed, following it for 20 minutes before finding themselves back at the same marker. The survey team pulled every marker by March 1898 and filed the maps as discontinued. No explanation in the official report, but the foreman's personal log, donated to the County Historical Society in 1954, included one entry. The ground feels wrong near those stones, like standing on a drum skin. And Martin Kress wasn't the trail's first victim. He was the 6th. In 1897, a timber surveyor named Roland Vickers disappeared 400 meters south of what's now mile marker 3. In 1912, 2 loggers vanished while marking trees in the same corridor. 1934 brought another case. 1956, one more. None of these cases ever appeared in Park Service records because the trail didn't become federal land until 1982. The disappearances lived in county sheriff's files, lumber company incident reports, and old newspaper clippings that no one thought to connect. When a researcher finally cross-referenced the coordinates in 2003, all 5 cases fell within a 1.2-kilometer stretch of the current trail. Search teams in each era used different methods, consulted different maps, never knew the previous cases existed. Each investigation started from zero. Each one filed the same conclusion: no evidence of foul play, no remains recovered, case suspended. But one of those 5 had left something behind that predicted exactly where the next disappearances would occur. Elias Drummond carried a leather-bound prospecting journal and a compass that his widow donated to the county museum in 1958, 2 years after a hiker found it wedged in a tree hollow. The journal's last 14 pages detailed his final survey of the trail corridor, looking for gold deposits in the creek beds. He'd marked 7 locations on a hand-drawn map, each with a small X and a note. Ground sounds hollow when struck. Compass reads 14 degrees off true north here. Voices at night, no source visible. The final entry, dated October 12, 1934. Something underneath. Can hear it. Going to dig tomorrow. Drummond never returned. His map sat in a museum storage box for 47 years, until a graduate student digitized the collection in 2003 and overlaid his marks on a modern trail map. 3 of those 7 spots matched disappearance locations within 50 meters. The 4th mark sat at mile marker 4.7, untouched, until 2006. 3 of those 7 marks aligned perfectly with later disappearance sites, and the 4th was about to claim its victim. August 1983. A 34-year-old geology professor named Marcus Chen disappears at mile 4.2, his backpack found neatly centered on a flat rock 200 yards off trail, his compass, wallet, and field notebook arranged in a perfect triangle around it. October 1985. Sarah Voss, a search and rescue volunteer who knew the trail better than anyone, vanishes at mile 3.8. Her water bottle, radio, and GPS unit form 3 points of an equilateral triangle on the trail surface. She's never seen again. June 1988 and April 1991, 2 more. Both experienced hikers, both in broad daylight, both leaving behind personal items in geometric arrangements that shouldn't happen by accident. All 4 disappearances fall within a half-mile radius of Drummond's 1978 marks. Then, in 1992, someone finally survived long enough to call for help. Aaron Pitts, 41, day hiker. He keys his radio at 3:47 p.m. on July 12th. His voice is shaking when he tells dispatch the trail moved, that he can see his car through the trees but can't reach it. Park rangers find him 4 hours later, sitting on a log 50 feet from the trailhead parking lot. unharmed, lucid, his arms covered in thin scratches he can't explain. He'd started his hike at noon, planned a 90-minute loop. When rangers ask what happened during those missing hours, he can't answer. He remembers walking, turning around, walking more. The car always visible, never closer. What he told the paramedic in the ambulance never made it into the official report. The dispatch tape leaked in 2009, 17 years later. You can hear Pitts in the back of the ambulance, his voice flat, describing the same 100-yard stretch of trail over and over. He walked it for an hour, maybe longer, the trail looping wrong, he says, trees rearranging. He heard footsteps behind him, heavy boots on gravel. Every time he stopped, they stopped. He turned around 6 times. No one there. He was alone the entire time. The scratches on his arms, he tells the paramedic, appeared during the 3rd loop. He didn't feel them happen, just looked down and they were there. 14 parallel lines on each forearm, evenly spaced. The paramedics' incident notes included 2 words the Park Service immediately classified: spatial anomaly. Dr. Michael Brennan was teaching quantum mechanics at UC Berkeley when a colleague showed him a newspaper clipping about the trail. The marks on the survivor's arms, the classified incident report. He'd spent 18 years studying magnetic field anomalies in geological formations, and something about the case fit a pattern he'd seen once before in Iceland. In March 1994, Brennan submitted a formal research petition to the Park Service. He wanted 3 months, portable magnetometers, and access to the exact coordinates where the ambulance had picked up the survivor. The Park Service denied the request within 48 hours. When he submitted a second petition with university backing, they sent a legal letter threatening litigation if he attempted to publish any findings related to the trail. Brennan had already hiked it twice, carrying concealed instruments in a backpack labeled as camping gear. His preliminary readings showed compass deviations, temperature drops of 11 degrees Fahrenheit in under 90 seconds, and something else he couldn't explain. He published them anyway, and within the data was a measurement that shouldn't exist in nature. The banned paper appeared in an obscure geophysics journal in August 1994. Brennan had documented compass deviations of up to 43 degrees within a 200-meter section of trail, occurring in regular 7-minute cycles. No corresponding magnetic source, no iron deposits, no basalt intrusions, nothing in the underlying geology that could generate that kind of interference. He'd mapped the anomaly zone across 14 separate visits. The deviations followed the same pattern every time. Needles drifting east, snapping back, drifting west, snapping back, always in that 7-minute rhythm. 3 independent compasses showed identical behavior, ruling out instrument failure. The cycle stopped exactly 200 meters past the start point, as if hitting an invisible boundary. Brennan's conclusion was careful, academic. He wrote that the phenomenon suggested a localized field distortion of unknown origin, possibly linked to subsurface voids or unmapped mineral deposits. What he didn't include in the paper was the note his research assistant had written in the field log. Compass reading 287 degrees. Actual bearing 244 degrees. We're walking in circles and the trail looks straight. But compasses weren't the only instruments going haywire out there. By the late 90s, hikers were carrying GPS units. The failures started showing up in ranger incident reports in 1997. Devices would display full satellite lock, 8 or 9 bars, then show positions that made no sense. 400 feet underwater, inside solid granite, 12 miles northeast of the hiker's actual location, which rescue teams confirmed by radio triangulation. A software engineer from San Jose filed a warranty claim in 2001 after his Garmin unit died on the trail. The manufacturer analyzed the device and found the battery had drained from 94% to 0 in under 6 minutes, with no corresponding power draw in the logs. The unit's internal clock had jumped forward 3 hours during the same window. Garmin replaced it as defective, but 7 other hikers reported identical failures between 2001 and 2003, all within the same trail section Brennan had mapped. Cell phones showed the same pattern: full signal, then readings that placed the caller miles away, then dead batteries that had been fully charged 20 minutes earlier. One hiker's Nokia recorded 11 incoming texts that never appeared on the carrier's network logs. They were time-stamped 6 days in the future. And then, in 2004, a hiker's camera captured something that made the Park Service close the trail for 6 months. The disposable camera was still in Sarah Chen's backpack when search teams found it 200 yards off the trail. 27 photos showed exactly what you'd expect: wildflowers, a creek crossing, her hiking partner laughing at mile marker 4. The 28th frame showed the trail ahead, except the path split into 2 versions of itself. Not a fork in the road. 2 copies of the same trail, one veering left, one veering right, both in perfect focus, overlaid on the same piece of film. The film lab in Sacramento ran the negative through 3 different analyzers. No rewind marks, no double exposure artifacts, no light leaks. Just 2 versions of a trail that only existed once, occupying the same physical space on a single frame. The photo was dated October 14th. The hiker had gone missing on October 11th. Kodak's forensic division examined the camera's internal date stamp mechanism, functioning normally. The film processing logs from the drugstore showed standard C41 chemistry, no irregularities, developed 6 days after the camera was recovered. FBI digital forensics confirmed there was no metadata alteration, no post-processing, no tampering with the negative. The image was captured on October 14th at 3:47 p.m., according to the camera's timestamp. Sarah Chen was reported missing at 9:20 p.m. on October 11th when she failed to meet her carpool at the trailhead. Park Service investigators tried every rational explanation. Maybe the date wheel had been knocked forward in the fall, but the previous photo, frame 27, was stamped October 11th at 2:14 p.m. Frame 28 jumped forward 72 hours with no frames in between, which meant either the camera had kept working without a person, or time itself was moving differently on that trail. On November 8, 2004, the Park Service assembled a controlled survey team: 12 volunteers, 4 geologists from UC Davis, 3 NPS rangers, 5 SAR personnel, with a combined 63 years of backcountry experience. Every member carried a Garmin GPS tracker synchronized to atomic clock time, plus a handheld radio on a dedicated emergency frequency. The plan was simple: enter at dawn, hike the 6.2-mile corridor in a tight group, place survey markers every 500 feet, exit by 4 p.m. They crossed the trailhead at 6:47 a.m. Radio check-ins came through every 30 minutes, crisp and routine, until the final transmission at 3:52 p.m., confirming they were 0.4 miles from the exit. At 4:11 p.m., 11 people emerged from the trees and crossed the parking lot. Their GPS logs showed a continuous 6.2-mile track with no deviations. Total elapsed time, 9 hours 24 minutes. When the ranger asked where Marcus Webb was, the geologist leading the group looked confused. "He'd been right behind us at mile 5, she said. Then he wasn't. 11 of them emerged exactly on schedule. The 12th never came out at all." Melissa Coe had worked this trail for 22 years. She knew every switchback, every blind turn, every spot where cell service dropped. On June 8, 2019, she was mapping GPS waypoints with her survey partner near mile marker 3.7. At 1:14 p.m., her partner noted her position in a meadow with visibility stretching 200 feet in every direction. Her GPS tracker transmitted normally. At 1:16 p.m., still transmitting. At 1:19 p.m., the signal stopped. Her final coordinates placed her dead center in that meadow. No trees, no rocks, no cover of any kind. Her partner, standing 60 feet away, never saw her disappear. The partner's written testimony is 4 pages long. Most of it circles back to the same 90 seconds. Coe stepped behind a single Douglas fir to check the GPS unit, called out, "I've got the reading," and didn't come back around the tree. The partner walked over. Coe wasn't there. Her radio lay on the ground 3 feet from the trunk, still transmitting static on channel 6. Her GPS unit was in the dirt beside it, screen lit, location reading undefined. Search crews swept a half-mile radius within 40 minutes. They found boot prints leading to the tree, no prints leading away, and carved into the bark at head height was a symbol no one on the search team recognized. 3 overlapping circles, forming a triangular negative space in the center. The cuts were clean, almost machined, with no chisel marks or blade striations. Fresh sap pooled in the grooves. It had been carved within hours. A graduate student on the search crew photographed it and ran the image through a petroglyphs database that night. She got one match: a boundary stone from an 1880s mining claim in the next valley over, 11 miles west. The claim records are still on file at the county assessor's office. The operation ran for 14 months and extracted 840 pounds of silver ore. Then, it shut down without explanation. The mining claim had been abandoned after 3 workers vanished underground in a single shift. County records identified the operation as the Blackthorn Claim, filed in 1919, licensed for gold extraction. But the assay reports told a different story. No gold. Instead, the mine had cut through extensive quartz formations running vertically through the mountain. The geological survey noted the formations exhibited unusual acoustic properties, amplifying sound in ways the surveyor couldn't quantify. The owner's logbook survived in the county archive, 47 entries spanning 14 months. The final entry, dated November 8, 1920, described voices in the deep tunnels, always at dusk, direction impossible to source. Below that line, a single word: closed. The claim was abandoned 6 days later. The mine's entrance sat exactly 1.4 miles from the trail, connected by an unmapped service road that hadn't appeared on any survey since 1923. Satellite imagery, going back to 1972, showed a faint trace through the forest. The road only became visible in late autumn imagery when leaf cover thinned. Even then, just a shadow in the canopy. A ground verification team reached the site in October 2005. The roadbed was intact, graded earth still discernible under decades of overgrowth. Tire ruts from vehicles that hadn't driven through in 80 years. Halfway between the trail and the mine entrance, they found 12 stones arranged in a perfect circle, each stone roughly 40 pounds, granite, placed equidistant. Inside the circle, a patch of bare ground measuring 6 feet across. Nothing grew there. Not grass, not moss, not even lichen. The team photographed the site and collected samples from 3 locations within the circle. Soil samples from inside the circle came back with a contamination signature that the lab flagged as impossible. The lab report ran 9 pages. Isotope ratios for lead and uranium didn't match local baseline geology. Off by margins, the lead analyst circled in red ink. Trace elements included osmium and iridium, at concentrations 140 times higher than surrounding soil. Those elements occur naturally in deep earth formations, below the mantle transition zone, not at surface level. The mineral structures showed compression patterns, crystalline deformation, indicating exposure to pressures exceeding 10,000 atmospheres, conditions that exist 200 miles underground, not in a forest clearing at 4,800 feet elevation. The report concluded with a single-line recommendation: forward to Geological Survey for secondary analysis. That referral was never made. But the Park Service wasn't the first agency to test that soil. In 1952, a Department of Defense memo classified at the time as restricted mentioned the area by name. The context was Cold War seismic monitoring, part of a network tracking underground nuclear tests. Sensors positioned 18 miles east had recorded what the memo called anomalous readings whenever calibration sweeps passed through this specific grid square. The readings weren't seismic events. They were described as interference patterns inconsistent with known geological formations. The memo's author, a civilian contractor named Gerald Pittman, recommended the area be excluded from any future recreational development. He used the word excluded 3 times in 2 paragraphs. When the park was established in 1967, that recommendation was either overlooked or ignored. The file was declassified in 2008 as part of a routine Cold War document release. No explanation was ever added for why Pittman's concerns were dismissed. The memo's appendix included a list of restricted coordinates. All 7 matched Drummond's 1934 map. A researcher named Elena Vasquez spent 4 months overlaying every data point, the military coordinates, Drummond's journal entries, and the GPS locations of all 23 documented disappearances since 1972. When she plotted them together, the pattern wasn't a cluster, it was a shape. 7 points formed a nearly perfect heptagon, each side measuring between 398 and 402 meters. The variance was less than 1%. At the center of that heptagon sat the stone circle along the service road, the one with the carved symbols. The geometry held across 80 years of data, as if each event had been placed there deliberately. Vasquez ran the coordinates through 3 separate mapping programs to rule out software error. All 3 returned the same result. She submitted her findings to the Park Service in March 2011. They responded 6 weeks later, requesting she not publish until they could verify on-site conditions, and at the exact center of that heptagon was a feature that didn't appear on any map until 2011. A LiDAR survey flown that summer for fire management uses laser pulses to map terrain through tree cover. The data revealed a 6-meter-wide depression at the heptagon's center, invisible from the ground under 40 years of leaf litter and a dense Douglas fir canopy. Park geologists arrived on October 9th. What they found wasn't erosion. The depression was a collapse, soil and rock fallen into a natural cavern below. The entrance measured 4 meters across once they cleared the debris, and ringing that opening, carved into bedrock at 8 evenly spaced points, were symbols. The same symbols from the boundary stone, the same symbols from the tree where Callaway's pack was found. The carvings were weathered but deep, cut at least 2 centimeters into stone. A geologist estimated they were decades old, possibly older, based on lichen growth in the grooves. The cavern dropped 11 meters before leveling into a chamber, roughly 15 meters across, and inside that chamber, resting against the north wall, was something human hands had placed there. 17 backpacks, arranged in a spiral, tightest at the center, widening outward like a nautilus shell. Each one sat upright, straps facing the same direction. The team photographed every angle before touching anything. Inside the packs, they found water bottles, first aid kits, granola bars still sealed in their wrappers, a Walkman with batteries that hadn't corroded, a paperback novel with a receipt tucked inside, date stamped June 1987. The nylon showed wear, fading consistent with age, but no mold, no rot. The zippers still worked. One pack held a disposable camera, the kind that stopped being common after 2004, film cartridge intact. A forensic analyst later noted the degradation didn't match the timeline. Organic materials underground in that humidity should have broken down faster. These looked like they'd been stored in a climate-controlled facility. but none of the packs matched the missing hikers' descriptions. The families were shown photographs. Rebecca Lou's mother said her daughter carried a blue Jan Sport with a Canada patch on the front pocket. The pack in the chamber was gray, no patches, different model entirely. David Ortega's sister remembered his red North Face day pack, 20-liter capacity. Investigators found a red pack in the spiral, but it was a Kelty brand, 30-liter, with gear Ortega never owned. A compass he didn't use. Trail mix he was allergic to. Every single item fit the profile. Hiking essentials, personal effects, the kinds of things you'd expect. But the specifics were wrong. Wrong brands, wrong sizes, wrong colors. Sarah Vance's family insisted she carried a black Osprey. The chamber held a navy blue REI pack with her initials stitched inside, except the stitching was machine done, and Sarah had embroidered hers by hand. A detective compared 11 packs to witness statements and found 0 exact matches. Close, but never correct. It was as if someone, or something, had tried to recreate the belongings from memory. The pack third from the center held a wallet. Inside, a California driver's license in the name of Martin Jeffrey Kress, issued 1979. The ID number checked out in the DMV database. Except the photo wasn't Kress. The face belonged to someone younger, different bone structure, darker hair. The birth date was off by 3 years, listing him as born in 1956 instead of 1953. And when investigators ran the license number through the federal database, it came back linked to a woman named Patricia Holloway in Dayton, Ohio. Holloway had never set foot in California, never met anyone named Kress. She confirmed the number was hers, issued in 1976, kept in her wallet until it was stolen from her car outside a grocery store in October 1979. The theft report was on file. She'd canceled the license immediately, got a replacement 3 weeks later. The stolen one never turned up. The Ohio woman had reported her wallet stolen in 1979, 2 years before Kress vanished. The team followed the cavern back. 30 meters in, they found a second chamber, smaller than the first. Walls smooth like water had carved them over centuries. The floor was empty, except for one feature, a hole, perfectly circular, 1 meter across. It dropped straight down into nothing. They lowered a light on 50 meters of rope. The beam disappeared into the dark without hitting bottom. They dropped a rock. 8 seconds before they heard it strike something far below. The air coming up from the shaft was warmer than the rest of the cave, carrying a faint metallic smell. And from somewhere far below came a sound that made the entire team evacuate immediately. They got audio equipment to the entrance before pulling back. The recording captured it clearly, a rhythmic pulse, metallic, repeating every 11 seconds with mechanical precision. Acoustic engineers ran the file through analysis software. The signature didn't match any known machinery, industrial or otherwise. The frequency was too low for natural cave resonance, too regular for water movement or wind. One engineer noted the sound carried harmonics you'd expect from metal striking metal, but the decay pattern was wrong. It lasted too long, like the entire chamber was vibrating in response. They ran a second analysis, this time expanding the frequency range to include subsonic wavelengths. A spectrogram analysis revealed something embedded in the sound that human ears couldn't detect. Below the audible rhythm sat a subsonic pulse at 7 Hz. Clean, steady, powerful enough to register on equipment 100 meters from the shaft opening. 7 Hz is the frequency known to cause anxiety and disorientation in humans. It's the resonant frequency of the human eyeball, which is why it triggers visual distortions and hallucinations. NATO studied it in the 1970s as a potential non-lethal weapon before abandoning the research. The acoustic map showed the field spreading outward from the shaft in a rough circle. At the surface, the effect zone covered 200 meters, centered almost exactly on the trail's midpoint, the spot where 11 of the 14 disappearances had occurred, which meant anyone hiking near the trail's center point had been walking through an invisible field designed to confuse and disorient. The team ran a second test 3 days later, this time mapping the field strength at 25-meter intervals radiating out from the shaft. The 7 Hz signal formed a perfect circle, 200 meters across. At the perimeter, the amplitude dropped to background levels, undetectable without the sensors. But inside the circle, the signal peaked at 7 specific points along the edge, each one corresponding to a vertex of the heptagon they'd found underground. At those 7 locations, the frequency spiked 40% higher than anywhere else in the zone. 6 of the 7 points matched the GPS coordinates where hikers had last been seen. The geometry wasn't just marking the field, it was focusing it, amplifying the subsonic pulse at the exact spots where people vanished. The pattern held across every measurement, every angle. But a 7 Hz frequency requires a power source, and there was nothing down there but rock and water. A contracted geological survey arrived 11 days after the acoustic tests. The cavern sat inside an ancient lava tube network, formed roughly 1.2 million years ago, when volcanic activity carved tunnels through the mountain range. The rock composition showed high concentrations of piezoelectric quartz, minerals that generate voltage when subjected to mechanical stress. Tectonic microshifts, even imperceptible ones, could compress the quartz and produce electrical pulses. The geologists calculated that sustained pressure from groundwater flow and minor seismic activity might create a subsonic hum, a kind of geological drone running through the cavern walls. The frequency would depend on the crystal structure and the rate of compression. It was plausible, natural, even elegant. A mountain humming at the exact frequency that scrambles human cognition, purely by accident. Except the pulse was too regular, too consistent, and too perfectly tuned to human vulnerability. 3 members of the survey team filed a minority report 6 weeks later. They'd found tool marks on the shaft walls at a depth of 18 meters, linear grooves too uniform to match natural erosion patterns. The quartz deposits weren't randomly scattered. They formed geometric clusters at intervals of 2.7 meters, a spacing that didn't align with any known crystallization process. The report suggested the cavern had been modified, possibly centuries ago, by hands that understood resonance and geology in ways the modern team was only beginning to grasp. Peer review was requested. The lead geologist, Dr. Marion Hess, began cross-referencing the site against historical land surveys and indigenous territorial maps. The minority report was withdrawn 9 days later, without explanation. Dr. Hess resigned from the university, deleted her research files, and moved to Oregon. She gave one interview, off the record, to a journalist who later refused to publish the transcript. The report was withdrawn after the lead geologist discovered something in the historical record that ended her career. The document she found was filed in the territorial archives under a surveyor's report from 1897. The crew had been mapping land grants when they came across something that stopped the work for 3 days. The notes described a circular stone structure, 12 pillars arranged around a carved shaft, native origin unknown. The coordinates placed it in the exact location of the current cavern, which meant the sinkhole hadn't collapsed naturally. Someone had filled it in. The surveyor's crew had photographed the site before covering it, but the plates were lost in a fire in 1902. What survived was a single sketch showing the pillar arrangement and a measurement. The shaft descended at least 40 feet before the surveyor's plumb line went slack, and the survey notes included a warning: local guides refuse approach, claim spirits take men who listen too long. The tribal council agreed to meet with researchers in 2019, after learning about the missing hikers. 3 historians shared oral accounts that had been passed down for over 200 years. They described the site as a wound in the ground, a place where the boundary between worlds had grown thin. Ancestors had sealed something in the deep after people began vanishing during vision quests. The disappearances had followed a pattern. Individuals would go to the site seeking spiritual guidance, and they wouldn't return. Those who did come back couldn't speak, or they spoke in voices that weren't their own. The sealing ceremony had involved 12 stone pillars and a covering of earth and rock, layered with specific ritual objects meant to keep the opening closed. The historians provided drawings made by their great-great-grandparents showing the exact configuration. The sealing had taken place around 1790, and it had failed once before. In 1823, a French trapper named Louis Mercier wrote to his brother describing 9 men from his hunting party who had gone to investigate strange sounds near a stone formation. None of them returned. Search parties found their camps intact, food still cooking over fires, but the men were gone. Tribal members came to the site 6 weeks later and performed another sealing. A missionary documented the ceremony in his journal, noting that the stone pillars had been knocked over and the earth disturbed. The tribe reset the pillars and covered the opening again, this time marking the location with carved warnings. Ledger drawings from the ceremony survived in a private collection and were authenticated in 2020. They showed the 12-pillar configuration, the shaft descending into darkness, and symbols carved into each stone. The same symbols Dr. Hess had photographed in the cavern before deleting her files. The symbols weren't warnings, they were instructions for maintaining the seal. The translation took 6 weeks. Dr. Chen's team cross-referenced the symbols with similar petroglyphs from 14 different indigenous sites across the Pacific Northwest, finally establishing a consistent pattern. The ledger laid out maintenance rules. Specific stones, marked with notches along their bases, had to remain upright and weighted. The circles at the 4 cardinal points couldn't be disturbed or broken, and the shaft entrance could be opened only partially, never fully exposed to air and light. Every single rule had been violated. The railway expansion in 1881 displaced 3 of the marked stones. Mining operations in 1903 shattered the northern circle entirely, and trail construction in 1967 removed the capstone, covering the shaft, leaving it open to the sky for the first time in centuries. Which explained the disappearances, but not where the missing people had gone. In March 2012, the Park Service authorized a comprehensive search operation. They deployed ground-penetrating radar units, 8 cadaver dogs from 3 different counties, and thermal imaging drones across the entire heptagon area. The sweep covered 120 acres. The GPR went 15 meters deep, scanning in overlapping grid patterns. The operation ran for 22 days straight, with teams working in 6-hour rotations. The dogs hit on nothing. The radar showed standard soil composition, root systems, scattered granite deposits. Thermal imaging picked up deer, a bear den 400 meters west, and dozens of smaller mammals. Normal forest signatures. They found no remains, no clothing, no trace of human presence, except in one location where the readings made no sense. The GPR, returns directly beneath the shaft, showed empty space, a hollow cavity approximately 40 meters down, measuring 87 meters across at its widest point, roughly the size of a football field, carved out of solid bedrock. The walls registered as unnaturally smooth, no fracture lines, no erosion patterns, no irregular surfaces, consistent with natural cave formation. The curvature was too uniform, the angles too precise. And the thermal signature read 98 degrees Fahrenheit. The surrounding rock sat at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, standard for that depth in the region. But inside the cavity, the temperature held steady at 30 degrees warmer, with no fluctuation over 72 hours of continuous monitoring. A heat source that large, that deep, that stable, required an energy input that didn't exist on any map or utility record. In November 2012, a joint team from UC Berkeley, University of Washington, and Montana State submitted a formal expedition proposal. They had $340,000 in funding, professional climbing equipment rated for 500-foot descents, and a suite of remote cameras designed for cave systems. The proposal outlined a 72-hour operation with continuous surface communication and real-time data transmission. The National Park Service denied the permit within 48 hours. The official reasons cited structural instability and visitor safety concerns, despite the fact that the shaft had remained open and unchanged for over a century. 3 weeks later, the park quietly closed public access to a 2-mile radius around the site, erecting no trespass signs and installing motion-activated cameras on every approach trail. The lead researchers appealed twice. Both appeals were rejected without explanation, and the case file was sealed under an administrative closure order typically reserved for ongoing criminal investigations. But 2 members of the team descended anyway, without authorization, in January 2013. Graduate students Wen Zhao and Carlos Ibarra entered the shaft at 2:17 a.m. on January 9th, equipped with helmet-mounted cameras, 200 feet of climbing rope, and enough battery power for 6 hours of continuous recording. The footage, recovered 11 days later from Zhao's damaged camera, shows the first 90 feet as expected: bare rock walls, darkness beyond the headlamp beams, the occasional glint of quartz. At 140 feet, the walls changed. Carved symbols appeared in vertical columns, each mark roughly 3 inches tall, repeating in patterns that matched the glyphs documented on the surface boulders. Zhao's audio track recorded her breathing rate climbing from 16 to 28 breaths per minute, though she said nothing. At 180 feet, the rope went slack. Ibarra's voice came through, distant and distorted. "I'm not holding it, it's just hanging." The camera swung down, revealing nothing below but more darkness. Then Zhao's light caught the bottom, still 20 feet away, and the rope remained loose in her hands, coiled in mid-air, as if suspended by something unseen. The final 10 seconds of video captured something that divided the research community for years. Zhao's headlamp illuminated a flat stone floor, perfectly smooth, reflecting the light like polished granite. Standing in the center of the frame, 12 feet away, was a human figure in a blue rain jacket and gray hiking pants. The figure stood motionless, facing the far wall, hands at its sides. Zhao's breathing stopped entirely for 4 seconds. The figure turned, slowly, mechanically, rotating in place without moving its feet. When it faced the camera, the headlamp lit up a woman's face, Asian features, black hair pulled back in a ponytail, the same configuration Zhao wore that night. The face was hers, exact down to the small scar above the left eyebrow, documented in her university ID photo from 2011. The figure's mouth opened. No sound came through on the audio track, but Zhao screamed, a single sharp burst that clipped the microphone, and the feed dissolved into static. The timestamp showed 3:04 a.m. The camera was found 9 days later on the forest floor, 8 miles northeast of the shaft, lens cracked, memory card intact. Zhao and Ibarra were found 3 days later, walking out of the forest 12 miles north, with no memory of the descent or the intervening 70 hours. The hospital in Portland admitted both students on October 19th. Blood work showed dehydration levels consistent with 72 hours without water. Their weight loss matched 3 days of complete fasting. But their hiking boots were clean. No mud, no scuff marks from descending 400 feet of concrete shaft. Their backpacks contained every piece of equipment they'd packed, down to the granola bars and water bottles, all unopened. The camera battery was dead when Forest Service found it, fully drained. But the memory card showed 4 hours and 11 minutes of recording time between the final frame of the descent and the moment the camera hit the forest floor. No footage, no files, just a gap where something had been. Frame-by-frame analysis of the static between the descent and the gap revealed a pattern. The static wasn't random noise from a corrupted file. It repeated every 7 seconds, the same visual distortion cycling in an exact loop. Digital forensics at the University of Washington isolated the audio track and ran it through voice recovery algorithms designed for damaged recordings. What came back wasn't white noise. It was human voices, dozens of them, speaking simultaneously in fragments that overlapped and cut through each other. English, Spanish, Mandarin, something that might have been Salish, all of them saying the same 3 words. Not yet closed, not yet closed, not yet closed. The phrases stacked on top of each other in a rhythm that matched the 7-second loop, voices rising and falling like a wave that never broke. One of the voices was Melissa Coe, the ranger who had vanished in 2004. The FBI's audio lab in Quantico ran a biometric voice analysis in February 2013. They compared the fragment from the static to 6 radio transmissions Coe had made during her final shift, the night she disappeared. Pitch, cadence, vocal cord resonance, the way her tongue hit her teeth on the T in not. 94% match, high enough that it would hold up in court as a positive identification. Melissa Coe's voice was embedded in footage recorded 9 years after she walked into the forest and never came back. The lab isolated 8 other distinct voices from the static. 3 matched missing persons reports from Cascade National Forest between 1998 and 2011. The other 5 had no names, no files, no record that anyone had ever reported them gone. And she wasn't the only missing person's voice in that static. When audio engineers ran the recording through spectral isolation software, they pulled 17 separate voices from the static. 6 matched missing hikers. Daniel Ortega, disappeared 2003. Sarah Chen, 1999. Marcus Webb, 2007. 3 others from the late 90s, all from Cascade National Forest. The remaining 11 voices were too degraded for identification, but the pattern held. Every voice spoke the same phrase, not yet closed, not yet closed, overlapping, layered, repeating in that 7 Hz rhythm like a breathing thing. The timing between repetitions varied by microseconds, enough to create interference patterns in the waveform. It wasn't an echo. These were discrete sources, all transmitting simultaneously from different points in space. But not yet closed implied something was trying to open. A geophysicist on the task force requested seismic data from the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network. The records went back to 1978, when the first monitoring stations came online. What they found were low-magnitude events, magnitude 1.2 to 1.8, too small to feel, but precise enough to triangulate. Every event centered on the shaft coordinates within a 200-meter radius. They occurred in clusters, 8 to 12 events over a 3 to 5 week window. Then nothing for years. The clusters appeared in 1981, 1987, 1993, 1999, 2006, and 2011. Cross-referencing with missing persons reports showed exact overlap. Every cluster matched a spike in disappearances on the trail. The interval between clusters ranged from 4 to 7 years, averaging 5.8, and the next cluster was mathematically due to begin in late 2014. On October 3, 2014, the National Park Service closed the entire Cascade Ridge Trail system. The official reason was geological instability. Rangers were stationed at every trailhead and access road, 24-hour patrols, no exceptions. Internal memos obtained through FOIA requests used different language, elevated risk period, monitoring for anomalous activity. One memo referenced coordination with the USGS and an unnamed federal agency, redacted in full. The closure had no precedent in the park's 87-year history. Local news ran the story for 3 days, then moved on. Hikers complained online, but complied. The forest stayed empty for 16 days. Then, on October 19th, 2 climbers bypassed the ranger checkpoint by entering through private timberland to the north. Only one came back. Shannon Morales was 34, a landscape photographer from Portland. She and her brother Daniel entered the restricted zone at 11:47 a.m. on October 19th through a gap in the fence line where timber operations had created access. According to Daniel's statement, they hiked for 90 minutes before Shannon spotted what she called an unusual rock formation, roughly 40 feet off the main trail. She told him to wait while she got closer for photos. He heard her call back, "I see something weird." He checked his watch, 1:23 p.m., and started toward her voice. When he reached the spot 30 seconds later, she was gone. Her phone lay face down in the dirt, camera light still on. The video showed exactly what she had seen. The recording is 8 minutes and 14 seconds long. For the first 2 minutes, it's stable footage. Shannon's hands adjusting the zoom, framing a cluster of 5 granite stones arranged in a rough circle. At 1:47 into the video, the focus locks on the largest stone. Carved into its surface, worn but unmistakable, are 3 symbols identical to the ones photographed in the cavern 9 years earlier. At 2:03, the camera jerks violently upward. A half-second glimpse of pine branches and sky, then the lens hits dirt and the screen goes black, but the microphone keeps running. And in those 6 minutes, Shannon Morales speaks to someone or something that never speaks back. Her voice is calm, conversational even. At 2:19, she asks, "How long have you been here?" 16 seconds of silence. Then, "Do you need help getting out?" Another pause. 22 seconds this time. You can hear her breathing, steady and controlled. At 3:08, she says, "Can you show me the way?" The silence stretches to 31 seconds. At 4:42, her tone shifts slightly, almost relieved. "Okay, I'll follow you." Footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving away from the phone. Then nothing but wind through the trees, until the battery dies at 8:14. Her brother, standing 30 seconds away, heard none of it. Audio engineers from the University of Colorado pulled the recording file and ran it through spectral analysis. Morales's voice registered at normal amplitude, approximately 60 decibels, clear enough to pick up individual words. Her brother, Joshua Morales, had been standing 27 meters downslope. At that distance, in open air, he should have heard her speaking at roughly 45 decibels, easily audible. He reported hearing nothing, not muffled speech, not faint words carried on the wind. Complete silence. The engineers compared it to recordings made inside anechoic chambers, rooms designed to absorb 99% of sound. But this was outdoors. No walls, no foam, just trees and granite. The 7 Hertz field, they theorized, had created a zone of acoustic interference, sound waves redirected or canceled within a localized boundary, isolating the source. Shannon Morales had been standing 30 seconds from her brother, speaking at conversational volume, entirely inaudible, which meant she had effectively been alone in a pocket of altered physics. The search operation launched October 12, 2014. 120 personnel from Douglas County SAR, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and Rocky Mountain Rescue. Aerial drones equipped with thermal imaging swept 200 acres in overlapping grids. Cadaver dogs worked the ridgelines for 11 days straight. They found nothing. No clothing fibers, no footprints beyond the point where her brother lost sight of her. No scent trail the dogs could follow past the clearing where her phone had been recording. 14 days, then the operation scaled down to periodic sweeps. But 17 searchers filed incident reports, GPS units, showing coordinates that placed them 4 miles east when they were verifiably on the western ridge, compass needles drifting 30 degrees off true north. Radio static at frequencies that matched no local broadcast, and 6 separate accounts of the same disorientation, the feeling that every direction was the wrong direction, even when retracing marked paths. And then, 6 months later, Shannon Morales called 911. April 3, 2015, 2:17 p.m. Douglas County Dispatch received an inbound call from 720-555-0143, Shannon Morales' cell phone. The connection lasted 40 seconds. A woman's voice, slightly breathless, identifying herself as Shannon. She said she'd stepped away from the trail to take a photo and couldn't find her way back. She asked the dispatcher for directions. The dispatcher requested her location. The system returned no coordinates. Not a weak signal or approximate tower triangulation. The screen displayed a single word: error. The voice, run through biometric analysis 48 hours later, matched Shannon Morales' voice print with 91% confidence. Cadence, pitch, regional accent markers, all consistent. The dispatcher kept her talking, trying to extract landmarks, trail markers, anything to establish position. Shannon described trees and rocks. She sounded confused, but calm. Then the line cut at 2:18 p.m., mid-sentence. Attempts to call back went straight to a generic network message. The number you have dialed is not in service. The call came in 6 months after her phone's battery had died in evidence storage. The evidence locker log showed the phone had been sealed in a Faraday bag on March 12, 2014. Chain of custody was unbroken. 3 separate technicians verified 0 battery charge when it was logged in, and the device had been powered off for 183 days straight. After the call came through, investigators pulled the phone for immediate inspection. The battery indicator still read 0%, no charge whatsoever. But the call log was there, clear as day. Outgoing to 911, duration 2 minutes 18 seconds, timestamp matching the dispatcher's records to the second. A dead phone, locked in a shielded evidence bag, made a call. The carrier confirmed the connection went through their network. The 911 center had the recording, and the call's audio file, when analyzed, contained the same subsonic 7 Hz pulse found in the cavern. Cellular engineers pulled the raw transmission data from the carrier. The call had connected to a single tower, 4.2 miles northwest of the trail. Standard procedure, but the signal strength was wrong. Surface calls from that distance typically register between -85 and -95 decibels. This one came in at -112. The waveform showed interference patterns consistent with rock and mineral density, the kind you'd see from a signal passing through layers of limestone and shale. The engineering team ran the propagation model 6 times. Every simulation pointed to the same conclusion. The transmission originated from underground, roughly 200 feet below ground level, directly beneath the sealed shaft. On October 9, 2016, a federal task force arrived at the site. USGS geologists, 2 FBI technical agents, and Park Service SAR coordinators. They brought a custom remotely operated vehicle, rated for vertical descents up to 400 feet, equipped with HD cameras, sonar mapping arrays, and radiation detectors. The ROV was lowered at 6:47 a.m. It passed through 80 feet of natural shaft, then entered a widening chamber. The sonar painted a space roughly 40 feet across. Temperature dropped to 51 degrees Fahrenheit. No radiation above background. the feed stayed clear as the vehicle descended another 220 feet. At 300 feet, the cameras tilted down toward the chamber floor. The image stabilized. For 30 seconds, the feed transmitted without interruption. Then the telemetry flatlined, every sensor cutting out at once. When they pulled the ROV back up 9 hours later, every data card was blank. The ROV reached the bottom, transmitted 30 seconds of clear footage, then went offline. When retrieved, its memory was completely erased. But the surface team had been recording. For 30 seconds before the wipe, the feed came through crystal clear. The ROV's lights illuminated a chamber roughly 80 feet across, carved directly into the bedrock. The walls were covered in systematic markings, not random scratches, but deliberate patterns arranged in concentric rings. In the center of the chamber sat a circular platform, elevated maybe 18 inches off the floor. And on that platform stood 17 human figures, motionless, facing outward in a perfect circle, spaced at exact intervals like hour marks on a clock. The Park Service ran facial recognition on every visible face in the footage. 9 came back with matches in the missing persons database. Melissa Coe was there, positioned at what would be 3 o'clock. Shannon Morales stood at 11. The figures stood completely still, no sway, no shift in weight, no unconscious movement. Their eyes were open, staring straight ahead into the dark water beyond the ROV's lights. Thermal imaging showed ambient water temperature, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, uniform across the entire chamber. No heat signatures from the figures. But when analysts ran movement detection algorithms frame by frame, they caught something. Micro-movements in the chest cavities, expansion and contraction consistent with breathing, cycling every 4.2 seconds. The pattern was identical across all 17 figures, perfectly synchronized. The footage timestamp shows 28 seconds elapsed when it happened. All 17 figures turned to face the camera at the same instant. Frame-by-frame analysis clocked the turn at 0.8 seconds from start to finish. Every figure rotated at the exact same speed, covered the exact same arc. No variation in timing, not even by a single frame. The movement was mechanically precise, like they were mounted on synchronized platforms. But the platform showed no rotation, no mechanism, just 17 people turning in perfect unison. In frame 1847, their faces were visible in full light. Every mouth was open. Forensic lip readers brought in by the FBI analyzed the final image for 6 hours, cross-referencing mouth shape and jaw position. All 17 figures were forming the same word, single syllable, lips rounded at the start, teeth visible at the end. The word was come. The Forest Service closed the trail on September 19, 2024. Not to hikers, to everyone. Chain-link fencing went up at every access point within 72 hours, backed by federal trespass orders carrying automatic $50,000 fines. The research team was formally disbanded under an executive order citing national security concerns. All footage, all audio recordings, all field notes were seized and classified. Dr. Caroline Chen's final report, submitted 6 days before the shutdown, has never been made public. Families received remains recovered from the chamber and surrounding forest. 11 bodies in total, though the locations made no sense. Marcus Lowe was found 400 meters uphill from the chamber, lying on his back in a perfect straight line with 2 others. No signs of struggle, no signs of movement. The trail stayed quiet for only 14 months. March 2026. 3 backpackers cut through the fence at the northern trailhead and entered the sealed zone. 2 of them walked out 11 days later at separate locations, both dehydrated, both with no memory of anything after the first night. The 3rd hiker's pack was found at the chamber entrance on March 29. Inside was a phone with 90 hours of continuous footage. Every frame showed the same thing: total darkness and a single standing figure. In frame 1, the figure stood at the far edge of the light. By frame 129,600, it filled the screen. The trail is still closed. The 17 figures were never identified. The acoustic shadow has no scientific explanation. 23 people remain missing, and no one who's entered that chamber has been able to explain what happened in the 30 seconds after the figures turned. The seismic station, 14 miles south, recorded something else. Between March 11th and March 28th, it logged 41 separate low-frequency pulses, each lasting exactly 7.2 seconds. The intervals weren't random. They followed a pattern: 4 hours, then 8, then 16, each gap doubling the last. Geologist Maria Chen ran the signature through every database she had access to. It didn't match earthquakes, mining activity, or underground water movement. The frequency was 18 hertz, right at the edge of human hearing. But the amplitude was wrong. A natural source producing that signal would need to displace roughly 400 cubic meters of rock per pulse. The phone recovered from the chamber held one other detail investigators didn't release publicly. The metadata showed the camera had been recording for 90 hours, but the file size was wrong. It should have been 47 gigabytes. Instead, it was 91. The extra data wasn't video or audio. It was embedded in the file structure itself, repeating every 4.3 seconds. 3 amateur radio operators in the area reported interference on March 27th, the same night the third hiker disappeared. All 3 logged the same thing: a carrier wave at 162.4 megahertz that lasted 11 minutes. One operator recorded it. When analyzed, the wave contained a subaudible modulation, cycling every 18 seconds. The pattern matched the seismic pulses exactly. The soil samples from the chamber showed something the Forest Service report glossed over: standard composition, mostly quartz and feldspar, except for trace amounts of magnetite forming aligned clusters. The alignment was precise, within 2 degrees, all pointing toward the chamber's center. Natural magnetite deposits don't organize like that. When the second expedition descended in May 2019, they brought a laser rangefinder to map the chamber. The device failed immediately, but not because of damage. It returned readings that placed the far wall at 34 meters, then 29, then 61, all within a 40-second span. They were standing still. The wall wasn't moving. The distance was. One detail from the 1897 survey never made it into the official archive. The surveyor's assistant, James Holloway, kept a separate journal. On August 14th, he wrote about a sinkhole 200 yards from the current trail. He described a smell like wet stone and a sound he compared to wind through a narrow gap. He marked it with a cairn and noted the compass spun freely within 10 feet of the edge. The indigenous account, recorded in 1923, mentioned a specific landmark, a split boulder shaped like a crescent, 30 paces from where the ground drops. Forestry crews found that boulder in 2003 during trail maintenance. It sits 140 feet from the main sinkhole entrance. The split is natural, but the surface inside the gap is smooth, almost polished. No tool marks, no weathering, just smooth stone. The final piece came from a hiker who turned back in February 2019, 3 weeks before the disappearances began. She reported feeling pressure in her ears at mile marker 7, like descending in an airplane. Her GPS logged the elevation as 6,140 feet. She checked again, 5 minutes later, without moving. It read 6,190 feet. She left the trail and didn't report it until after the closures made the news. If cases like this pull you in, there's more waiting. Thanks for watching.